when we're talking education and funding for education, it seems like we just go all over again every year. It starts all over again. Dr. Rick Timbs, good morning. And here we are again talking about aid and funding to schools.
Absolutely, and I think we're going to keep doing it for a long time because it's supposed to be predictable, but the state legislature keeps reinventing the aid formula every year on their own.
Right. And which means, again, school districts, especially upstate, really get the short end of the stick here.
Yeah, we do. Actually, what's happening here is it's not just the amount of money that's in state aid and the average amount of state aid and things like that. It's really the distribution to these districts. And, of course, our region is really in need of a tremendous amount of state support. But I think we've got to also realize that it's the state's constitutional obligation to provide adequate funds, and they've been shortchanging these schools at least since 2006.
So, in a perfect world, what would the formula look like?
Well, the formula would look like, it would make sure that the districts that have the highest levels of poverty, the districts that have the greatest numbers of non-English speaking students, the districts that have the lowest fiscal capacity, which would be they have lower property values, lower incomes. Right. Those types of districts would receive significantly more aid per student than would wealthier districts by comparison.
Take a Utica, a Rome. These are great examples where Utica especially. I just heard that the city of Utica School District is now over 50 languages. I don't know if that's true or not, but somebody just told me that the other day. Over 50 languages. Either way, it's a lot of different languages they have to deal with, and we do a terrible job of funding these schools.
Absolutely. So you can imagine how heavy a lift it is, how much it must cost to educate kids from different countries. But it's not just that. It's students also coming from poverty homes where they're not really prepared for school yet. So we need significant amounts of reading programs and writing programs and mathematics. And I think, as we all know, all you got to do is turn on your computer or watch anything on TV and find out how complicated things really are in the real world, and how schools have got to ramp up to get kids into a level of sophistication and analysis and doing their math and writing and so on. That's so much more than when we went to school.
Yeah. Can you talk, I know it's not your necessarily your thing, but this is testing week here, right, for the elementary students. And it has, is it me, or has it just not been a big story this year, the opt-out story?
Well, I think it's less of a story than it has been in past years. They've made some changes to the test by shortening the test. I think the tests are more targeted to exactly what they really need to know. The key thing about taking the tests, of course, is that certainly parents have a right to opt out, but they also have an obligation to find out how well their students are doing. And I think in the real world, when people say, well, I know this and I know that, in the real world, they would ask you to prove it. And that's basically what these tests are doing. The tests aren't perfect. No test is perfect. I think we all taken the driver's test and found out it's not perfect, even the written exam and so on. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're a perfect driver, but it does give indications of what you need to work on and what your strengths are.
Yeah.
So there's certainly positives and drawbacks to the test. But if you really want to know, in some non-arbitrary fashion, what you can prove you can do, what you know, what your attributes are, then one way to do it is to take some type of assessment. And assessments will occur throughout our lives.
I want to throw a couple of cliches at you. These are political terms. I call them cliches. Mm-hmm. Political terms that are used politically, and we as civilians, if you will, we pick them up and we use them in debate purposes when we're talking to our friends and neighbors. So one would be, we're teaching. I don't like the fact that we're teaching to the test. Can you talk about that one?
Well, I hope you're teaching to the test. That doesn't mean you only teach what's going to be on the test, but you have to teach at least what's on the test, because the test is what the kids are required to know and do. For instance, I could teach a whole bunch of driving techniques, driving backwards, doing donuts and all that, but they're not going to be on the driver's test. So I think if you wanted me to have you pass the driver's test, I would teach to the test. That doesn't necessarily make it bad. I think that's one of those sayings that sounds terrible. But the thing is it's really not all that bad. I think teachers can teach to a test to make sure the kids can perform as necessary on what is expected of them.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they have to limit their classroom time to just things that might be on a test. we've got to understand that a test is usually a pencil and paper type thing, and now, of course, it's starting to be on computers. But why can't we have project-based learning and group work and all kinds of things that would really inspire these kids to do well? And I think they will learn just as well those ways and still perform on a test.
And I know your big thing is it's important for our students, our kids, to be prepared. We have nanotechnology coming to the area. We have other opportunities coming, and of course, competition from around the world right now.
Well, you got to remember that the phrase, let's use one of those phrases you're talking about. Well, when I went to school, when we went to school, Bill, no matter what generation we're in, is irrelevant. This is a different generation and different needs. They don't need people to do what they did in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s up there at the nano site. They're going to need people with different sets of skills. And these skills, I'd say, are pretty highfalutin skills compared to what we had to learn. So I think the key thing here is that we've got to be prepared internationally. Our competition is international. It's not like you may play basketball one local school against another, but that's where the competition ends for that type of thing.
Yeah.
These kids are competing not only to get into schools, but for jobs. So, you want the best mechanic. You don't want somebody who just made it through the school.
Last cliche I'll throw at you, and this is in your wheelhouse, is, we've already tried this. Throwing money at the problem is not the solution.
Well, that certainly sounds like an easy answer to a complex problem. It's just like this, so I guess no worker's ever going to get a raise, because why throw more money at them if they just keep doing the same thing? The truth of it is costs increase throughout the entire economy. Schools are experiencing increases in health insurance costs and labor costs and so on. Well, look at you've got all these kids who maybe have learning disabilities perhaps, or have special needs, and these types of things. You need specialized people that can work with these kids, and this costs money. The world runs on money. Get real.
Last part of this whole thing is, where do you think we're going to end up? I mean, I know where you want to be when it comes to this formula. Where do you think we end up?
Well, I'm hopeful that we will actually exceed what the governor has already proposed, which is about $1 billion across the board. But much of that $1 billion, about a third of it, was already being sent to schools because of expenditures the schools had made, with the promise that money would arrive. But we certainly need more than the governor is proposing. I'm hopeful that what they will do is update the formula for the distribution of the money, and then add additional money so they can phase in over time. Constitutionally, the state of New York owes these schools a minimum of $4.3 billion. And so I think they've got to actually come up with a mechanism to make that come true.
All right, we appreciate your time. It's going to be interesting. Of course, the deadline for the budget is Saturday. A very interesting day for it to be budget day, right?
Absolutely. Well, it's actually midnight Friday, Saturday morning.
All right, well, there you go. When the clock turns to April 1st, April Fool's Day, it's due. All right, Dr. Rick Timbs, thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.